few logistical items and some follow-up from yesterday. First, those of you who were on with us for the seminarian session, I think you were suitably impressed, and this is an indication that the future of the church is in pretty good shape if we have three fellows like that, and one of them is particularly articulate about it all too. So it's a good indication. Bishop Kennedy just passed over very quickly an item about Catholic school textbooks last night, and I'd like to remind you or bring to your attention, if you don't know, there is what's called the Catholic School Textbook Project, and those books are published by Ignatius Press. They're really excellent, and it pulls together, it's a social studies curriculum, but it pulls together literature, art, music. So when you're talking about the 13th century, you don't simply say King so-and-so was in France and King so-and-so was in England, but tells you all of the historical, social, cultural, artistic background. And it's a wonderful way, first of all, to teach history, but also what I talked about in terms of reinforcing or introducing and then reinforcing a Catholic culture. And then another item, we talked a great deal about Catholic identity issues. The Dominican sisters from Ann Arbor, so Sister Mary Elizabeth's community, have produced this wonderful program in virtue education. Normally when we do a live presentation, I have pamphlets and brochures from the program to give to all of the priests. It is a superb approach. You know, so often Catholic moral theology is accused of being negative. Thou shalt not, and so on. The Dominican approach to moral theology is a positive one. So it's the Beatitudes, it's the virtues. And the sisters have put together this excellent program. It's a Disciple of Christ, Education and Virtue. And just very quickly, the way it works is the school is all focused for this particular month on a particular virtue. And there's a little journal for the kids themselves to keep, and there are scripture texts that go with it. There are several videos that give you background information on it that are rather charming. In one of them, they ask a kindergartner, what's your virtue this month? And he says, we are working on magnanimity. But it's been very well received. And the priests that have been in our previous seminars, many of them have adopted the program in their schools to great satisfaction. And again, it's the type of thing that helps us educate yet another generation, because if the kid is going home and saying, we're working on prudence or fortitude or whatever, that's something that frankly 90% of their parents don't know anything about, even if they had a Catholic education. So I would suggest that you look that up. Sister Elizabeth, do you have maybe a website or a link for that? And then thirdly,
my presentation.
What is it, sister?
I have a link in my presentation.
Oh, good. Okay.
And a flyer in the box under my talk.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Okay, good. You see, they can promote their own stuff too. It's not just Brother Owen. There's an excellent book that came to my attention, published by Angelico Press. It's called St. Benedict and Catholic Education Today, Glory in All Things. It's by an author I had never heard of before, Andre Gusthurst Moore, St. Benedict and Catholic Education Today. And it takes the rule of St. Benedict, and of course, this makes a lot of sense. You know, we've heard all this talk for a number of years now about the so-called Benedict option. and just what does that consist? But let's remember that it was really the Benedictines that got the whole Catholic education thing off the ground. Benedict hies himself off to Subiaco to escape the city of Rome. Some other men find out he's there, they join him. Lay people find out about them, they start forming a community around them. And what's the next thing? They start opening schools. And everywhere the Benedictines went was the beginning of the monastic schools, which then gave birth to the cathedral schools, and the cathedral schools to the university system. So it makes an awful lot of sense to go back to the primal source, if you will. And so he has chapters on beginnings, spirit, transformation, leadership, learning, curriculum, co-curriculum, living. So you can see it's a very inclusive approach to Catholic education. Very, very a good read, and again, something certainly pastors and administrators should read, because it gives you ample opportunity then to insert these ideas into your school, but also a good book for faculty to read and to study together. And then finally, there's a group called Ruah Woods, R-U-A-H. Ruah in Hebrew means spirit or breath or wind. And these folks have put together some wonderful curricula on John Paul's theology of the body. And this latest brochure that they sent me is called Standards for Christian Anthropology, based on St. John Paul's theology of the body, grades K through 8. And it's very, very well done. It's, in effect, it gives you lesson plans on how to present this for elementary school children. And so topics: creation is a gift, original solitude, original unity, original nakedness, communion of persons, gift of self, body, soul, unity, body reveals the person, historical man, fall and redemption, purity of heart, virtue, vocation, sacramentality of marriage, virginity for the sake of the kingdom, eschatological man, and the resurrection. So once again, a very, very inclusive program. So, any questions or comments about any of our material from last night? Okay, well, we've got two sessions this morning that are rather provocatively entitled Administrators and Religious Talk About Priests in Our Schools. And as those of you who have participated in this before know, I say, no holds barred, be honest, be direct. It doesn't mean you have to be all totally negative, but reflect on your relationships with priests in the school environment. The good ones, the bad ones, the indifferent ones. And and let's say 10 minutes each at the most, so that we then can get everybody in and then have some opportunity for feedback from the participants. So Dean Gillette, you want to kick off?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. And as I said last night, it's so good to see so many of you back and some new faces. So just a little history about me, and I'm sorry to be repetitive. For those of you who've heard this before, but when Richard and Vera were speaking about priests and nuns as role models, I just, kind of the remarks I had planned were right in line with that. So, I have to say that in my life, I have been shaped by who I am by nuns. So I was a Catholic school student from kindergarten through 9th grade. My mom was a nurse in a Catholic hospital where I grew up, and she was taught in nursing school. She didn't go to college. She went to the kind of nursing school where the Sisters of the Sacred Heart taught her how to be a nurse in practice. I was taught by the School Sisters of St. Francis. And probably one of the most influential people to me was my great aunt, who was a sister of the Good Shepherd, and she was a cloister. So before Vatican II, we would all pile in the car and drive up to Milwaukee from Chicago. Twice a year we got to see her. She was behind bars. And the sisters would bring us not very good lemonade and some dry pound cake, and we would get to visit with her for 2 hours. So we had 4 kids, and my dad's brother had 5 kids, and my grandma and grandpa, we'd all go up in cars and truck to Milwaukee. After Vatican II, she got to come out from behind the bars, and for her 40th anniversary of her investiture as a Sister of the Good Shepherd, there was a reception in the backyard of the convent, and it was the first time I got to touch her. But she wrote me letters monthly growing up, and her job in the order was to paint priest vestments and to paint calendars and things that were sold to the public when they came to visit the convent. I also then began my teaching career for 9 years in a Catholic school, and then I moved to Wisconsin to go to graduate school, and I taught 2 more years in a Catholic school. And so I've had my share of priests who ran those schools, and been shaped incredibly then by the nuns who raised me and by my first college teaching job, which was at the College of St. Rose in Albany, where the Sisters of St. Joseph Carondelet were my biggest supporters as I made it through the tenure track. But so I tell you this story for 2 reasons, and I hopefully won't take 10 minutes. I mentioned last night, you'll hear my doctoral student, Elise, in the progress she's made in her dissertation. She's almost finished. But one thing that I have been able to do as her advisor as she thinks about why do principals take jobs in Catholic schools and what makes them stay in Catholic schools. And I'm not gonna, no spoiler alerts here. You gotta wait to hear her tomorrow. But the one thing I said to her as she began to do her lit review, I said, where are the pastors? Where are the priests? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you can't talk about why principals come and why they stay without talking about who's in charge of the school and how they decide to select a certain principal. So for me, last year I had a little visual. This year I'm going to use my fingers. I like to think of the relationship as a triangle, and in the center of the triangle is the child and the family, the student who is in your school and their family, and oftentimes their extended family. And then at the ends of that triangle are the teacher, the pastor, and the principal, all working together to be sure that the child and family are served spiritually, they're served academically, and they're served socially and emotionally. And so I am not going to air my dirty laundry about, my 11 years teaching in a Catholic school. I will say that both of the priests who were my pastors had aspects about how they ran things that were difficult for me as a teacher to deal with, but I want to talk about what they did do for me as a teacher that was positive. And the first thing was they would have all the teachers over to the house a couple times a year. We had an opening of school barbecue. Aside from we had First Friday Mass for the whole school, and then we always had, feast day masses, but we always had a mass a couple times a month where I would just take my class to Mass, and Father would talk directly to the students and explain to them, why are we doing this? Why does this happen the way it does? Why does this go the way it does? But he would have the teachers over to the house. We would have an opening of school barbecue. Sometimes we'd all bring a dish to pass. We'd have a Christmas celebration. We would have an Easter celebration. We'd have an end of year party. But that level of personalization, I think was very important to me as a teacher, because it allowed me to see the principal and the pastor side by side working together for the school. It's not a situation where, I as a teacher could, if I didn't get my way from the principal, I could go run to the pastor and talk him into giving me what I wanted. The team approach was really important. even if Father wasn't involved directly in events for parents and families, showing up at sporting events, showing up at spelling bees, showing up at science fairs, making your presence known. Aside from all the, I'm not going to repeat what Richard and Vera said around the ways in which the pastor makes a difference. Finally, I just want to end by saying that as you look at your staff and who they are and how they work with the children, and you work with the principal around how to hire good teachers, I know that, it's very difficult to get sisters who love teaching and are in the schools. When I was growing up, I had a nun almost every year for something. That just doesn't exist anymore. But the role that the sisters played for me was very similar to the role that Richard and Vera were talking about the priests playing for the young men and young women last night. So whether we can beg, borrow, or steal some sisters who love being in the schools, even if when my daughter went to Catholic school, the only nun left was the music and art teacher. But, that was enough to have Sister Rosabelle there helping my daughter and having my daughter see her as a person who was dedicating her life not only to God, but to the children and their families. And I was very lucky that my aunt, Sister Maud, was alive until my daughter was 8. So I trucked up to Milwaukee with my daughter then to keep the tradition going so that sister lived to be 101. I got to go to, when she retired, her retirement home was outside of St. Louis, so I got to go for her 101st birthday. She was a little, in and out at that time, but I was glad to be able to see her. So I think in hearing what the rest of the folks have to say today, as I think about training leaders for Catholic schools and we think about preparing teachers for Catholic schools, that triangular relationship between the teacher, the principal, and the pastor is extremely important in ensuring that we are able to serve families and children in all of the aspects we want to in the Catholic schools. Oftentimes today, we get hung up on the academics, which is not unimportant, of course. You're going to hear a lot about the classic curriculum or whatever academics people are using. But I think the spiritual formation, the religious formation, and the social and emotional growth of kids and the support of families is, really on par with their academic development, because unless those three are all coming along, we're not doing the job we need to be doing for kids and families. Thank you.
Father, okay.
Okay, good. Okay, am I on now?
Yep.
Okay. Just to piggyback on a few of Dr. Gillette's points, particularly about sisters. It's one of the great tragedies of Catholic education in the country that we lost that influence in the church. As I alluded to last night, I'm essentially a nun's boy. I got my faith and my vocation from the sisters. And 13 years of sisters, 3 different communities, all of whom were excellent teachers, exemplary religious, and all 3 of those orders went down the drain by 1971. Extremely unfortunate. But another point to make about that loss of the sisters was not only a problem for the schools, but for the church. The sisters provided a feminine face of the church. Since then, with the demise of that aspect of Catholic life, the church tends to look awfully male because the only official representative, visible presence of the church is a male. But if you belonged to my grammar school parish in the 50s and 60s, and at the principal mass on Sunday, saw 35 sisters in the first 4 pews, you realize that there was a feminine face to the church, number one. And number 2, as I mentioned, the conversation stopper in a Catholic home was 2 words, sister said. and that is a great loss. But we have, sisters from two wonderful communities that are thriving. I guess they both have laundry lists of bishops a mile long, begging for them to come to their dioceses. But also, it's possible, and Maureen alluded to this very well, that even having one sister in a place is extremely important. That's that visible presence that kind of brings the whole picture together in a very, very wonderful way. So, Kevin, you're next on the list. This is our wonderful superintendent of the schools from Detroit, who does yeoman work not only for his diocese, but for our Catholic Education Foundation. And he and I talk sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. But Kevin, take it away.
Thank you, Father. And let me just say on a preliminary basis that when we take a look at Father Peter and all the wonderful work he's able to do, just like a good Catholic student should do, just do what Father says. Just do what Sister says. So it's an honor to work here with Father Peter. So just to reflect upon some individual experiences I have over a variety of different dioceses, from Philadelphia to Denver to now here in Detroit, it's really important that the Catholic priest, either the pastor or the parochial vicar, is really involved in the school. Absent that, the Catholic school is really not going to have a very strong Catholic identity. Plus, really, to the fullest extent possible, you will see that that Catholic school will be on a downward path, which is something none of us want to see. So I'm just going to speak in a variety of different stories, and don't worry, I'm not going to go up to the 10 minutes. But just to share some experiences of what I've seen successful school pastors do. In one particular location, I had a school pastor that was very involved in the school. Of course, not only when it comes to offering a weekly mass and things like that we're accustomed to, but he would actually be in the school, be physically present. That is certainly important. Greeting the families and the children as they came to school in the morning and as they left. Also making sure that when it came to report cards, this particular pastor would actually pass out the report cards to the children. It's really important because not only does it show that the pastor cares, but again, in terms of our theology, we believe and we know that the pastor acts in persona Christi. They are there in the place of Christ. So it is certainly important that that particular gospel witness is there, and that type of communion and continuity with the church teaching is there just by the presence of that priest. That pastor is still there at that particular school. It's not here in Detroit, but it's in one of my prior archdioceses, and he continues to have a flourishing school. Speaking here in Detroit, I won't name the name of the parish, but I have a wonderful school pastor that really, during this trying time of COVID-19, when we're doing online instruction, would make it a point of pride, and also more so taking a look at a point of presence to go into the classrooms, to go into the Zooms, to drop in. That's certainly important. The families loved it. The priest, really made an impact, and the students really appreciated it. To go in to say, what are you learning about today? And to let them know that, of course, God is with them and he cares. This priestly presence, even in this virtual environment, is important. And then I have another priest that decided, and it's not just this one priest, but it's an example because there are a whole bunch of priests that were doing this, which I absolutely loved, was able to actually, during this time of the pandemic, actually televise, or more so through Zoom, offer the weekly school mass, still doing that during this pandemic. And it was wonderful because not only did the students participate, but the parents were able to participate as well. The parents, of course, have their kids. They're working remotely for the most part. And for them to actually be there to see and hear from Father, whether it's the pastor or the parochial vicar, is certainly important. I mention these stories because, again, the priest is essential. If you do not have a priest or a priestly presence at the school, people are really going to start questioning, what is the school about? Why isn't Father here? but as well, and I'm not going to be mentioning names, out of an abundance of Christian charity, we have schools across the nation where the priest, is not there, or the founding religious order doesn't really have a presence. And that actually trickles down, as we all have seen in various places, where there's a watering down of the theology, a watering down of the instruction, and a watering down of the Catholic culture. And we don't really have to look very far to see exactly what makes a Catholic school Catholic. Yes, the priest should be there. But who will keep the faculty and the principal and the community accountable for following what Archbishop Miller said in terms of the 5 hallmarks of what makes a Catholic school Catholic? Who's going to be responsible for ensuring that the school has a supernatural vision? Who's going to be responsible to make sure that the Catholic school is founded on the Christian anthropology? Who's going to make sure that the school is going to be animated by communion and community? Who's going to make sure that the school is going to be imbued with a Catholic worldview throughout its curriculum, and finally, sustained by gospel witness? It's not just the priest's job alone, but the priest needs to share that. But to share that, the priest needs to be there, or the founder, or I would say the religious order, someone from that order needs to be there in order to ensure that. How many of our, again, not going against any type of current arrangements, any particular type of institution, but how many of our Catholic colleges and universities are no longer led by, religious? And that's a problem. It's not to say that a lay person, a lay man or a lay woman can't do a good job, but we need to have the priest. And I really believe, in my personal opinion as a layman, we need to have archbishops, bishops, cultivate those priests. I would love to give my job up. I love my job. I love to give my job up to a religious. I actually took a look at some documents when I was, as being a lawyer as well, trying to redo the canonical statutes and then ultimately the articles of incorporation for one of our high schools here in the Archdiocese of Detroit. It was fascinating. I had a Monsignor have my job. In terms of the associate and assistant superintendents, they were all priests. So with this degradation, and for a variety of reasons, we have problems. So the priest's role in our Catholic schools is paramount, not just setting the tone and the tenor, but the culture, ensuring, adherence to the magisterium and everything else. And the more priest is involved, the better off we're going to be. But the priest, in my personal view, needs to share some of those responsibilities. And when I say share, I mean to delegate. And when I say delegate, I don't mean just to, push away. They have to supervise ultimately, because the buck stops with the priest. So I want to say to all the gentlemen here, and also to our religious sisters, thank you for all the work that you do. And ultimately, I hope that we're going to be able to be in a place where the religious can become, and the priests, a lot more involved over time in our school system, at our individual schools. And one quick last note, Father, if I may, the role of the superintendent is not to be, the individual that sort of lords over people. The role of the superintendent is, again, a delegation of the archbishop or the bishop's responsibility in assisting, not telling, but in assisting the school pastors about what they should be doing. I hear various stories across the nation about what superintendents do. And frankly, in terms of Catholic faith, morals, and values, I'm there to assist, but I'm not there to tell, because I don't have a collar. I have a collared shirt, but I'm not a priest. So make sure that when it comes to the priests, in addition to the religious here, certainly work hand in hand with your superintendent, but you ultimately are in charge of the faith, morals, and values at your school. And thank you for all the work that you do. So, Father, I'm going to yield this back to you.
Spoken like a good lawyer. Next up is Bishop Kennedy, and we're deprived even of his sealing this morning. Are you there, Bishop? Oh, maybe he'll get himself in gear. Let's move on to Mary Pat Donoghue. Was the principal at St. Jerome's School in Hyattsville that turned that school around, and she invented this wonderful classical curriculum, and she shakes her head no, but it's true. And by an incredible miracle of grace, she was appointed the head of the bishop's office on Catholic education in Washington, and she's also a member of our Catholic Education Foundation board. So, Mary Pat, you have a lot to say about this issue, I think. And her uncle, by the way, was the great Archbishop of Washington, John Donoghue, who had been a priest of Washington and auxiliary bishop there, and then eventually did a magnificent job in Atlanta. And it's something that you want to talk about leadership on his watch in Atlanta, the opening of new parishes, new schools, and new high schools. So it's in the genetic pool for her, I guess.
You give me a lot of credit, Father Peter. Thank you so much. I certainly was a recipient of the great gift of the church, which is its intellectual tradition. But I'll talk about more of that tomorrow when I talk about the story of St. Jerome. For my piece on the reflection of the role of priests in school, I found my attention really drawn to the concept of the teacher and the formation of the teacher. And this was spurred by last week's decision in the Supreme Court in the Our Lady of Guadalupe case, which you may recall was the case in which the court recognized that Catholic schools are institutions carrying out a ministry in the church, therefore have a right to select all who will perform ministry. Now, that was a great win for us, but I think it's more than that. I think if we properly understand it, it can become the impetus for a true shift in understanding the nature and essence of Catholic education as something that is wholly different, wholly other than secular education. We know that for Catholic schools to be effective, everyone involved must understand that the faith, religion, is not a subject in the curriculum, but is in fact the key to the unity and integration of the entire school program. So this, of course, then going back to our argument before the court, that we see our teachers as ministers. This is going to direct a different way of forming, of selecting teachers. And I think that the role of priests, pastors, associates, etc., is absolutely critical in this. We must move away from our current stance, which is a hybrid of a secular best practices and education approach with a Catholic identity overlay. The dualism is simply defeating. And I think there's much evidence, even before COVID, that we simply have not been able to fully form the integral formation of students that we're called to do. We see this in the fact that many adults are fleeing the church. So I think this is a moment, frankly, for Catholic schools to call back to that. We know that, as we're speaking a lot of parish schools, 65% of our schools are parish-based schools. And so I think that the priest has an important role in helping the principal and all of the teachers understand that what they're actually doing is sharing in the pastoral ministry of that pastor, who of course shares in the pastoral ministry of his bishop, who of course shares in the pastoral ministry of the Holy Father. So I think that's one thing. I think currently teachers, principals in some cases see themselves as employees of the parish, which of course certainly they are, but they're much more than that. And I think that's one aspect that the priest certainly can educate and illuminate. The religious dimension of education in a Catholic school is an excellent document that I would recommend to anyone involved. And in that document, there's a call for laity, the lay teachers, to exercise a faith witness. Well, of course, there's that word. And of course, it calls to mind Paul VI's famous quote about modern man listening more willingly to witness than to teacher. And of course, Kevin can tell you better than I with his attorney background. One can only be called as a witness in the courtroom if one has material knowledge or an expertise of the subject at hand. So we're asking teachers to be witnesses. We're asking them to be ministers, then we have to be very certain that they in fact have the capability to exercise that role. Another church document, the Catholic School, states that the pastoral care of teachers is a priority because by their witness and behavior, teachers are of the first importance to impart the distinctive character to Catholic schools. Their ongoing formation in faith is indispensable. So pastors have, and parish priests have an absolutely critical role in that formation. I will tell you, Father Peter talked about our story at St. Jerome Academy where we, converted the school to a Catholic liberal classical approach. And the very first professional development speaker I called was our pastor. I asked Father Jim Stack, our pastor, to come over and to share with the students a philosophical reflection on the transcendentals, because they were going to begin hearing a lot about truth, goodness, and beauty. And quite honestly, all of us were never steeped in this way. So I would recommend pastors that you work with principals to come over, not just to give a homily or a sermonette, but to give some substantive information. Most Catholic teachers, quite honestly, even if they went to Catholic colleges, have not been formed in any type of a philosophy that leads one to the truth of Catholic teaching. Most of them have never heard Augustine and Aquinas. I know myself, I did go to a public university, but all education philosophy starts with Rousseau and then into Dewey. And then, you see the problem. So I think that's one key. We are living through a time of a dearth in understanding of philosophy. I came across a quote once, I can say this because I'm a teacher, in which the author of a book said, teachers are overtrained and undereducated. And I think there's a sense in which that is true. In my life as a teacher, I remember the cycle of constant training on the new reading program, training on how to do math manipulatives, but not any type of recognition that the teacher is herself an instrument. And since we've gone to court and said ministry, right, which of course we all recognize the minister is in fact an instrument, well then we need to start forming in such a way that the question for teachers isn't, well, how can I use this in the classroom, but rather, how does this form me for the classroom? How does this sharpen my understanding? How does this illumine my own faith, my own sight and vision of the world? And I think what we're suffering through, quite frankly, and I think the Holy Spirit is rousing us, is the loss of confidence in Catholic education's ability to be really transformative. We simply don't believe this anymore. Pastors, priests can lead the way in encouraging, urging hope, moving forward. I see, Tom's on this call, and he has been just leading the charge for advocacy at the federal level for Catholic schools, and as my office has as well. But I have to tell you, people, a lot of what I get back from folks is, hey, are the schools even worth saving? Well, the answer needs to be yes, but we need to examine ourselves for that. So certainly professional development as a teacher, as witness and minister, but also I guess the next dimension is meeting the spiritual needs of your teachers. One of the things that we always did at St. Jerome's was when we had a professional development day, those days, those blessed days when the children didn't come to school, but the teachers did, we always began the day with Mass. So Father would be with us for Mass. He would be with us into breakfast and into the first beginnings, making sure that there's opportunity for adoration, assisting teachers, to meet their own spiritual needs. I will tell you that to that degree, even communicating a certain expectation, Father Stack used to tell me and my teachers, if you don't have an interior life, you will get wiped out. So he was always kind of, really promoting that for all of us. So this was just, my little reflection on what I think is a great moment. And I think once again, highlights not just the need our schools have to have priestly presence, but the fact that we really need to transform the understanding of the school as being that which shares in that pastoral ministry. So with that, I will yield back.
Well, thanks, Mary Pat, as usual, illuminating and very, very convincing. 2 points here. Mary Pat makes very important angle to emphasize. Every teacher in a Catholic school is a religion teacher. Right? If you're a physics teacher, you're an American literature teacher, a math teacher, whatever, you are automatically, first of all, a religion teacher. And that's the point that won the day at that Supreme Court case last week. Precisely our understanding that every teacher is a religion teacher. It also goes to underscore our understanding of the unity of curriculum. Everything, as I mentioned last night, every spoke in the wheel of a Catholic school curriculum brings one to the center, which is Jesus Christ. And if that's not the case, if you can't say that honestly, then you have a problem, and you better learn how to deal with that. Bishop Arthur, are you with us yet or no?
Here.
There you are. Wonderful. So you want to give us your 10 minutes of wisdom?
Well, last evening I spoke about the very importance of the way in which we try to give access to in the schools, give access to students in a very practical, concrete way. I mentioned the importance of Montessori. I mentioned the importance of Dawson as people who saw that one of the things that was needed and was missing for a very long time, and Dawson actually saw that the crisis of Western education was basically because of the difficulty of having abandoned so much of the detailed contributions that the church had made in the establishment of translating religious experience of the mystery of Christ and the church into the daily life of people who worked in the fields, who took care of their families, who were educated in their homes, and who did all of these things that permitted children the access to a massive world, which gave them the dynamism that Christ gives to us through the infinite mystery of the charity of God. And this charity, I mean, this is when we look at our culture today and we see what is going on and what do Catholic schools have to contribute to the situation that we're living in. It's precisely at the very core of the mystery of the crucifixion. I mean, it's the mystery of the sacrifice, the loving sacrifice of Jesus, which is what we are calling children to imitate in the way in which they live their lives and in which they have access to the examples of so many people in the past who have enriched the mystery into the details of every sphere of human existence. I think one of the very important things that we can try to do today for teachers is to help them understand the way in which children actually learn, because, you know, having taught in a university for 32 years, one of the things that always fascinated me was the way in which the education department provided and made a translation out of a kind of secular enlightenment into the way in which learning takes place. And I think that we need to help our teachers to find a way in which they can continue to we just heard about being confident. To being confident in our work is to be able to say to our teachers that the importance is helping children to develop the questions from within their different disciplines. And as you mentioned, Peter, because every question in the long run is a question about God. And in some way, to try to help them to understand that in the different disciplines, they are concretely finding manifestations of what is God's glory. We need to help them understand that the mystery of glory, which we talk about in relationship to God, is not some abstraction, but it's a very particular and concrete activity in which they are engaging and participating in this glory all the time. And in school, this can be something that they can find as ways by which they are connected with through their prayer and through their constant learning and seeking understanding. This is all a participation in the mystery of God. And the ultimate translation of that mystery will not just be knowledge, but it will be, how do they begin learning how to treat one another in charity? How do they treat their parents and their brothers and sisters in charity? I mean, these are the things that we can help them to understand, I think, in ways that will allow them access to the mystery in which we are calling them to participate. And how we allow them to ask questions. I think the Montessori thing is very, very interesting in this regard. And by the way, you know, she was the one, as you know, Peter, she was the one who created this understanding in relationship to catechesis. She understood from understanding how to teach children catechesis, how it is that they would learn anything. And so her understanding of the way in which a child begins by the world of touching everything with their senses and seeing the world through their senses, and how that from that transformation that takes place through questions from their senses into the world of intelligence, a spiritual world, is so important for them to be able to nourish through the church and through their learning in ways that will take them through into adulthood. And by the way, one of the things that I was reading recently was Newman's poem, what was it, the thing that Elgar put to music? No, it's escaping me. Anyway, Newman has this thing about the issue of death that is very, very interesting, and in which he talks about the way in which the senses disappear. And when the senses disappear, they are replaced by a new way of participating with God. And this is the way in which we have to prepare our children too. I mean, one of the things that was always important when I was in Catholic grade school was the importance of the understanding of seeing to eternity. And this is one of the things that we can help children to begin to see from the very beginning, that they are destined for eternity. And that this is a way in which these little steps that they take grade by grade by grade are leading them through time into eternity. Because I think that unless we can find access to the way in which the dynamism that God has given to each child is manifested in questions, dynamism manifested in prayer and in love, then we are wasting the lives of our young children in ways that are terrible. So what you have been doing, Peter, for so many years is so important. And I think that the people you have gathered to present in this conference is very important, and I'm very happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. A couple of points. The bishop mentioned awe and wonder, and Mary Pat talked about adoration. These are two fundamental keys to human and Christian formation. And the experience of awe and wonder is co-natural to children. You bring a child into a Gothic cathedral, and the first thing comes out of his mouth is, oh! It's the sense of awe and wonder. Bring him to a Motel 6 looking church, he has no idea what it's all about. But that's that co-natural thing. And Eucharistic adoration, and here again, I want to talk specifically about the role of the priest, making that available to children is a wonderful way of introducing them precisely to this whole concept of awe and wonder, that God is God and I'm not. If you teach children to have that understanding, then they don't begin to develop a relativistic morality, for example. But this idea of adoration, it hit me in a very interesting way when we were doing the Catholic identity assessments for the high schools of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. One of my visitations was to a high school that I believe, Monsignor Pilato is not on with us yet, but I believe at the time was 72% not Catholic. Although interestingly enough, they had 2 boys from the school who were in the seminary. But I had a luncheon with the student council, and the 72% that were not Catholic were mostly Black Baptists. And I said to the kids, what's the thing that you love most about this school, Sarah High School of all things? And this Black girl said, I love adoration. And I said, oh, what do you love about it? And she said, because they'd get a pass out of study hall or homeroom or anything to go to adoration all day in the school. She said, I just go there and I tell Jesus what is on my mind and heart, and I listen to him to come back and talk to me. Well, of course, that's like that famous story about John Vianney and the old man in the back pew. I look at him and he looks at me. But that this girl who's not Catholic would already intuit the power of the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And that changes a whole attitude then about what we believe about the Eucharist. That horribly distressing study last year, 70% of Catholics who receive communion every Sunday don't believe in the real presence, which only confirmed, unfortunately, a study I did with Gallup in 1993, which was exactly the same figure. So in that almost 30-year period, the facts haven't changed at all on the ground. But it's largely due precisely to the fact of a misunderstanding or a total negation of the issue of awe and wonder in the presence of God. So next up, let's see whom we have. Sister Mary Elizabeth.
Thank you, Father. A lot of you already spoke on some of the points that I want to reiterate, but I really want to focus on creating a culture that really encourages deepening divine friendship, our relationship with God. And this is specifically for the students, but not limited to the students, because of course we also want to be leading all of the faculty, ourselves, and the parents, the alumni, etc., into a deeper relationship with God. And the priest's presence is essential to creating this culture and strengthening this culture. First of all, of course, through the sacraments. Only the priest can bring the sacraments to the school. No one else can do that. Our schools in Ann Arbor that my community administers, we have daily mass for the whole school. They're K-8 schools, and that's just how they start the day, and sets the whole tone for the school. At some of the schools that we're in, that's not possible, given the current circumstances, but many schools will offer a mass before school that students or parents can attend, as well as faculty. At one school where they had a situation like that, I remember every time the basketball team had a game, they wore their mass day uniform and they attended mass as a team in the morning before school. So they were all on campus early going to mass together. And it was so encouraging and so beautiful to see, all these high school boys dressed up, ready for mass before school. And that set the tone of their team, as well as helping to influence the whole school culture. Confession is another essential thing to have on campus. At a school where we had a chaplain students, let me know that they were so grateful to be able to go ask the priest at any time, Father, can I talk to you? Father, would you please hear my confession? Unfortunately, the following year, we were not able to have a chaplain at that same school. And the students said that they were just devastated. They didn't understand how the chaplain could be taken away from them, how they could not have a priest at a Catholic school on a regular basis. And, many of them said, it's really hard for me to make a daily mass before school that's not at school. I would love to go to confession more frequently, but, a priest is not available here. So I think when we do have priests in schools, it's just really important to make those sacraments available to the students, and to know it's not about numbers, no matter how many people are coming. We know that the holy sacrifice of the Mass being offered on campus, that is tremendous graces for the school. At this school, where we no longer had a permanent chaplain, we did have monthly Eucharistic Adoration as a whole school. And the students kind of knew the routine. They would all come into the gym in silence. There'd be like a little bit of an intro, and they would have surrounding priests would come to hear confessions. And they would tell them how many priests were there and where the confessions would be set up. And that after exposition, they could get in line. So we would have exposition, and as soon as exposition was over, as reverently as they could, they would run to get in line. Because they knew if they didn't get to confession before the end of the period, the priest would leave. And I still get goosebumps telling you this story, seeing high schoolers run to get in line for confession. Like that's them living their faith out. So I think we just need to support that to the best of our abilities. So if you're a priest in school, make the sacraments available. Speaking of adoration, which Father and Mary Pat had already brought up, Eucharistic adoration is a time where students can really develop that personal relationship with God, to have that one-on-one time where they're just speaking to Him. Whole school adoration is a very powerful witness. At this school, we didn't have a chapel large enough for the whole school, so we had adoration in the gym on a portable altar. The students would be on the floor, and up close to the Blessed Sacrament, we had a special area where students could voluntarily go up, and otherwise they were just seated where they came in. And students of all interests, all grade levels, would go up, for a few minutes, kneel, and then come back to their seat. We had, the students who were really into the music program, the students who were really athletic. One of my non-Catholic students, went up and knelt before the Lord. And to have them do that in front of their peers, I think, is another beautiful example of their witness of their faith, that teens are willing to not only go to Mass or go to adoration because it's required, but entering more deeply into that prayer experience. So I think having Eucharistic adoration is a very, very helpful to create that culture where we're helping them to grow in divine friendship. At a different school, we had over 1,000 students, and we did not have adoration on a regular basis, but we did have adoration for a special occasion, and they were all in the gym, like over 1,000 students, and they were absolutely silent as the Blessed Sacrament was brought in. We had explained what was going to happen and what they needed to do, and seeing them absorb the experience and be attentive to it was just so amazing, and I think it helped them to grow in their faith. One way to make adoration more practical is to have parents, sign up so that they can be with the Blessed Sacrament throughout the day, and then teachers can bring their classes, or students can come during study halls, and then you don't need to worry about what happens during passing periods when classes are shifting or things like that. Another way priests can help students, faculty, and families grow in divine friendship is really through evangelization and catechesis. I asked a priest I know what he thought I should say in a short remarks, and he said the priests that the students encounter may be the only, in the schools, may be the only priest they encounter. And that from his point of view, Catholic high schools have a large number of baptized pagans with little or no affiliation to a parish. So the priest is a model of integration of life, academic understanding, and relationship with God. Living out the virtues, being a person of prayer, a witness to joy, and then a real witness to the ultimate meaning of this life is beyond this life. We're looking for God. It really giving that perspective, especially in today's society where so many young people are really facing a lot of fear and anxiety. That's just been rising over my years of teaching, to really give them that perspective, the divine perspective. It's so important that the priests are present. One of the priests that I worked with would come to class and walk in, see the students in the hallways. Priests can also go to the lunchroom, go to club meetings or sports. There's a priest who was a high school football coach, and his young men looked up to him so much. It was just beautiful to see. And when they had a win, he would bring them donuts the next school day, and to see them come into the faculty office and talk with him and get their donut. They just, everywhere on campus, they knew that he was someone that they could go to and that they really admired. And we heard in the seminarians' testimonies last night just ways that priests can be involved. Of course, creating a Catholic culture with things like May crownings, praying the rosary, pro-life club, encouraging the trip to the pro-life march. Also being involved in the faculty life, going to faculty meetings, department meetings, being present in the faculty room, greeting faculty, and then parent-teacher conferences, attending sporting events, attending events parents would be at, going to wakes, funerals, things like that. Just being part of their life as much as possible are ways that you can start to evangelize and catechize, ways that you can get in to build your relationship with them and show them that a relationship with God is ultimately the most important part of the school endeavor. So really being in persona Christi and bringing the sacraments and helping us to grow in our divine friendship. So thank you, Father.
Good, thank you, Sister. 2 points that Sister raises about the availability of the sacrament of penance. A pastor just told me the other day that he went to a new parish this time last year, and he decided that the first week of school to have confessions for the children. And most of them really didn't quite know how to do it. And he discovered that the average kid who was in 7th grade, his last confession was actually his first confession in 2nd grade. The previous pastor never, ever had confessions for the school children. And what I always recommend is the beginning of the school year. We're talking about going en masse, not what Sister's talking about the availability at any time, but as a school to go the first week of school. Why? Because unfortunately, probably a lot of those kids didn't go to Mass the whole summer. And then during Advent and Lent, and before the end of the school year. At least those 4 opportunities. And that's not overly burdening. It shouldn't be anyway. And then back, this issue of adoration keeps coming up, and it's really so important. In one of the high schools that I ran, I discovered that in the 14 years of the school's history, they had never had either a retreat or a day of recollection for any of the kids, let alone the faculty. And so I decided, well, to deal with the seniors would be impossible at that point. So start with the freshmen. They don't know any better. They think that's normal. And so we started with an evening of recollection, afternoon and evening. And I concluded the evening with exposition of the Blessed Sacrament and the Rosary and Compline. And I noticed that the 2 boys who were serving benediction were kind of weepy. And these were two big jocks. In fact, one of them, as a freshman, was already on the varsity football team. And as we were taking things down from into the sacristy, I said, fellas, were you kind of, upset? Did something happen? And well, no, Father, everything's fine. And I said, well, no, come on. And one said, well, I never felt so close to Christ in my life. It was their first time, and I never realized they had never had the experience of Eucharistic adoration for their 8 years of grammar school. And but this was such a powerful experience for them. And we tend to forget that liturgy in itself is generally, it's communal experience, But adoration allows one to dive more deeply into the mystery of Christ on a one-to-one basis. As sometimes when you hear about Catholics who have left the church, they say they leave because they finally had a relationship with Christ. Well, that's a terrible condemnation of what we've been doing or not been doing, that a Catholic could say that, So, last but not least, the great Michael Buell from St. Francis High School in Traverse City, Michigan.
Yeah.
Mike, how do you go? Okay.
Thank you, Father. That's the nicest thing anybody's called me today. I'm glad to be with you. I've been in the diocese for 25 years, so a long time. And my family went to school up here. My grandma boarded with the nuns way back in the day, and we were fortunate enough to have Dominican sisters. Found our schools very important to me. And Sister Ann Catherine, my first grade teacher, so when I think about her, I could still rub my ear and suck my thumb. She was delightful, and she loved me as much as anybody has ever loved me. And to that end, the warm feelings that my education with her brings up speaks right to adoration, I think, a little bit, and the importance of youth-oriented adoration, pre-high school, and the power of K2, K4, and 5 adoration, and what's being settled into their hearts when it starts very young is a lifelong comfort. I believe that they'll come back to in life and in their toughest times. So just to kind of jam pile on the adoration train, it's powerful, and it's been powerful for the youngest of our kids. Nothing beats getting lent a rosary by a 5-year-old when you're in adoration, and somebody says, "Oh, I brought 2, Mr. Buell, you can have one." It's the best. Great formation there. Over the years, my experience with pastors professionally, has been up and down. Is different personalities, different people. Turnover plays a role in how difficult it is sometimes to galvanize direction. Certainly turnover of principals and turnover of pastors as they meet each other and miss and hit, can cause a lot of difficulty galvanizing a direction. And so the one thing that the Dominican sisters had that I was unaware of at my young age was a common direction, right? Their charism was driving them, and that lack of a charism is a real harm to us being able to use the schools to drive the faith and bring kids closer to Christ in a way that's meaningful. Right now, many of our Catholic schools, their purpose changes. While all Catholic, as a pastor changes, as a school board changes, and the absence of a ongoing diocesan-wide sort of look at the direction of the schools, I think makes it pretty tough for a pastor to get transferred around through their career and go to different schools, different Catholic schools that feel very different, and then find their role within it. And so I think one of the things that the diocese are really being called to do is develop a common sense of direction, a charism, if you will, that the schools have that they can follow. It would help with the pastors over the years, I think, at a serious level. The other thing, it gives all people something to be inspired by and something to follow. The Catholic schools right now, I mean, we are in such a sweet spot right now with the mess that our country's in. This is not doom and gloom. This is opportunity. And I just think the schools are uniquely positioned to do education that can't be done anywhere else right now. And so I think that support of lay people and lay leadership, giving pastors the courage to allow schools to go where they need to go to be exceptional right now, it could really be helpful. It's the only place where you could have weeks of conversation on social issues, Catholic social teachings, and the issues of our times. You can't do it in a 15-minute, 10-minute homily very easily. What we can do in a classroom that you can follow up in day after day and sit there and give the issues, the patience that's required, the education that's required, the understanding to bring kids along on these difficult issues. And so I think our chance to bring our pastors in on this will put them in a leadership role in the church, in the kids' perspective. It's up to us, I think, to give the pastors the right and the courage to step up right now, because we're best situated to handle this in our Catholic schools. It's an awesome time, spooky for sure, weird, all those things, but this is how sometimes God allows us to reveal Him. Are in these toughest times right now, and the schools are just the right environment to tend to our youth in a way that helps our future. It's pretty tough with the social media beating down not just the kids but the parents, with the media beating down our parents and them going to church once a week to have that conflict resolved in their minds sometimes. It's just a reality that's very, very tough. But the schools, perfect. 6 hours a day. Take the time to form kids. And I think Mary Pat said it best when she said overtrained and undereducated. I appreciated that. I hadn't heard that before. But certainly the formation of our teachers right now is so powerful. The pastors doing the formation can be really meaningful in a different way. And so I'm so thrilled to have the Dominican sisters on the line with us today, because there's such a physical representation of Mary and the ability to show our kids what grace is as defined by the Lord, right? And grace is something they don't see often today in its truest form. And the pastors right now have this, the priests have this great opportunity to get in front of kids and just be themselves, be unabashedly Catholic, not worry about what they're going to get after Mass from a backlash from a homily, but know that they have days to deal with these issues. And I love it. I'd love to get a little more charism from our diocese, which could help, I think, as priests are transferred. But this window is unique and ripe, and I look forward to having this fall to kind of dig in a little bit. Our kids haven't seen us in 6 months in the middle of so much, where they need us the most. But great opportunity lies ahead. So that's my take for today. Father Peter, thank you for having me.
Mike, don't engage in false humility. I want you to do a little bit bragging about what you've done there at the Grand Traverse Catholic Schools. Some incredible building projects, etc. So just 30 seconds, that's all though, okay?
Yeah, sure, Father. Well, first of all, to the stability point, I've been here a long time. Charles is here. Charles has been here a long time in Traverse City, Michigan, and it's beautiful and all, but what's most beautiful is the Catholic culture, for sure, in this town. And it's some courage has allowed us to do great things We have a tremendous set of parents that have latched on to our delivery and our support of our environment. But we did build a $17 million elementary school. It's all paid for, and it's beautiful. It looks distinctly Catholic when you see it. The chapel is the most beautiful room in the place, and nobody's going to drive our place and wonder who we're about. And it was very important to us. And I should say, as far as raising money goes, the purity of the Catholic cause certainly is raised a lot of money for us. People are hungry for it, whether the media wants to tell us that or not. They're hungry, and they sacrifice for it. They're out there.
Mike makes a very important point. Sometimes people have the mistaken notion that if we downplay the Catholic identity, we'll get more students and more money and so forth. It's exactly the opposite, huh? The more you highlight the uniqueness, the Catholic identity, the more people are going to be interested in the whole product. That's in terms of giving us their children to educate, but also donors who want to say, yeah, I don't want this to go to, a secular institution that has a crucifix on the wall. And what they've done at the Grand Traverse schools is a wonderful case study in how to build up enrollment and your base of support in the overall community. Two quick points on the Montessori front. She's been mentioned a couple of times. Maria Montessori would vomit at the idea of a secular Montessori school, right? It was precisely her understanding of education that it's all centered on Christ. And so once you take that element out, and it's unfortunate that there are so few Catholic Montessori schools, but that's the essence of the whole project, is precisely the religious component. Everything else revolves around that. And then someone mentioned about having a former teacher, a sister who's now 101. Well, I've got a better story for you. I had written an article about sisters in schools for Catholic World Report last December or so, and I mentioned a couple of the sisters in particular who had taught me, one of them being Sister Regina Rose, who with 68 kids in the class told my mother in 5th grade, I can tell you 3 things about Peter's future. He will be a priest, he will be a teacher, he will be a writer. That's pretty good insight when you consider the logistics of it all. At any rate, having written that article and mentioned her, I thought, I haven't heard from her in a long while. And normally we get a beautiful Christmas card with the Palmer method handwriting and so forth. And I didn't quite know how to call. The order has gone off the cliff entirely. But I called the retirement home, and I rather gingerly said, is Sister Regina Rose available? I thought, I didn't think, maybe she's on the other shore at this point, huh? And so the receptionist said, sure, hold on. And in a second, a voice came on, hello? And I said, Sister Regina. She said, who is this? I said, one of your former students. She said, Father Peter. Out of the blue. And I said, well, sister, I said, I haven't heard from you in a while, and I took you out for your 95th birthday. And she said, yeah, but what happened? She said, oh, I said, how are you doing? She said, not bad for 106. And I said, oh. I said, well, I took you out for your 95th birthday. And she said, yeah, where were you for 100 and 105, though? As sharp as could be, and then proceeded to tell stories about me in 5th grade, stuff that I don't remember in the least. But again, it was that investment of the whole person in the educational project, and it's a very edifying thing. This is not to say that we cannot have authentically Catholic schools with a total lay faculty. I always remind people, Mother Seton started this project as a lay woman, and Bishop Carroll kind of pushed her to become a nun and start an order. But in point of fact, it's very possible. It's just, it's a lot more, it has to be a lot more intentional if that's your situation, than if you have religious present in the school environment. So anybody with questions for any of the presenters in this round before we take a little bit of a break? No? Okay. So let's see. Why don't we reassemble at 11:10? 11:10, okay?